Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Folks are still filing in, but it's always good when they're walking past the book buying table. My name is Joe Dabbich. I'm the executive director here at the Georgia Center for the Book, and on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library, First Baptist Church, and Charis Books and More, welcome to an evening with Barbara Kingsolver. I think I've been working at this thing for 16 years. It's about time. But we are so very glad to have you here and having these events in a safe environment and trying to keep you all safe as well, too. Just a few quick things. So, as you'll notice, there is the question microphone dead center here. So be thinking of your questions now. For when we get to that portion, someone will have to step up to the microphone and ask one. So let's try and not have that uncomfortable pause in the program. Also remember that one of your questions tonight should not include, could you please sign my book? No. It's Atlanta, like a sugar baker would say, that's tacky, and we're not gonna do it, okay? So none of that. Also remind you, restrooms are downstairs. After the program, of course, there are restrooms up here as well. But during the presentation, let's try and keep the doors from banging and things like that. Also, we are recording tonight's event, so do me a favor, no flash photography. Put your phones on silent, because I don't want to have to Patty LaPone anybody in the middle of the presentation, okay? Right now, I would like to bring up E.R. Anderson from Charis Books, Charis Circle, because, you know, these events don't exist in a bubble. I couldn't do these kind of events and have this many people in a building without help from First Baptist and without help from our great independent bookstores here in Georgia. So please welcome E.R. Anderson.
Thank you, Joe. Joe's always the hardest act to follow. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the director of Charis Circle, which is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. We're really honored to be here at the First Baptist Church in Decatur and always with our friends from the Georgia Center for the Book. Ms. Kingsolver's books have a sense of being right on time, even if, as a reader, you discover them 10, 15 years after they were initially released. And the book that you have in your hands is no exception. In 2007, when Ms. Kingsolver came to Emory University to speak about her nonfiction, now classic book, Animal, Vegetable, Miracle, Charis was the bookseller, and Ms. Kingsolver spoke to each of the hundreds of people waiting in line to meet her. To us at Charis, struggling mightily in the throes of the beginning of the recession, that night was a miracle. It saved us. Ms. Kingsolver is an unwavering champion of independent bookstores and of readers like you. We are as grateful for her presence off the page as we are for her words on the page. So thank you. It's now my honor to introduce Reverend David Jordan, who will welcome you to the church and introduce Ms. Kingsolver.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Just a couple of nights ago, my wife and I were speaking with our daughter in Winston-Salem, and she said, you know, my first term paper, my primary source was Animal, Vegetable, Miracle. Before local food movement was cool. We were in Los Angeles last week, and my son had on his coffee table this book called Flight Behavior. My other daughter did an internship in Mexico City and made a pilgrimage to the home where Frida Kahlo and Leon Trotsky had their special friendship, because she and we had read The Lacuna. And then there's the Poisonwood Bible. Don't get me started, except to say that for denominational people, it was theologically correct and denominationally uncomfortable. We are all here tonight, Barbara, because you have impacted our lives in important ways. You have helped us to see things differently, feel things differently, You've expanded our imaginations, and you have helped us gather in this place, excited because you have helped us see the world differently. And we are thankful and appreciative and are so grateful to be able to welcome you to this platform tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome Barbara Kingsolver.
Thank you so much, and I will just address the Baptist question right away. To paraphrase a character, my favorite character in Poisonwood Bible, Father Fowles, we can say there are Baptists and there are Baptists. And you all know what I'm talking about. So thank you so much for being here in this wonderful venue, this fabulous place. Thank you for supporting Charis Books. They do such important work in this town, and they've been doing it a really long time. That outfit has legs. I did not know that I had saved those legs to walk another day, but I would do it again in a heartbeat. I love independent bookstores. They are so much more than books. They're sort of the pulsing heart of communities and of freedom of ideas. So thanks for your support of all independent bookstores, and thank you for coming tonight. I come to your city a lot, or when I say your city, Decatur, Atlanta, and the associated communities. I come here a whole lot, but it's not here. It's a magical kingdom known as Hartsfield-Jackson. Because where I live, I have a little airport, and it flies to exactly 2 airports. This is one of them. So every trip I take begins with Hartsfield-Jackson and then wherever. And so this time they let me out. I got out of the matrix, and it's lovely to be in your part of the world, in your city, and in this church. And it's exciting. Do you all have the book already? Could you hold them up? Wow. I mean, you probably don't realize I don't see it before you see it. You know what I mean? I haven't seen I spent years quietly at my desk working away, but to see the book, the real book in people's hands is it's like a birth, like a multiple birth. So it's very exciting to me. I'm at the beginning of my book tour. It only came out on Tuesday, so this is the 3rd stop of my pretty long book tour, and so I'm still really, really excited to see that book in your hands, because I want it to be in your heart. I will also warn you, given our location, it's a real blue book. The narrator is a teenage boy. He's a rural teenage boy, and this is not fantasy, it's realism. So he has some very colorful language, and I was just thinking about all the F-bombs in all of those books, and thinking that we may be at this moment setting a record for the number of F-bombs in a Baptist church. But you go where your characters lead you, and just when you're reading, remember, that's him, that's not me, that's him. I love this boy, Demon. He's the narrator. It's really interesting because I assume nobody's read the book yet, so we're coming in, maybe a few of you, but I don't want to tell you too much about the book, but I can tell you a little bit about where it came from. I live in Meadowview, Virginia, which is southwest Virginia, kind of near Bristol, Tennessee. It's ground zero for the opioid epidemic. I love where I live. I am the proudest Appalachian you're ever going to meet. I grew up in Kentucky. I tried out pretty much the rest of the world, came back to the mountains because that's where I want to raise my family. That's where I want to live in our old farmhouse until, as my mama would say, they carry me out in a box. So I love my place. I love my community. I love the way people are, the resilience, the resourcefulness of Southern Appalachia. And as a writer, I consider it part of my mission to represent my people accurately, respectfully, and with nuance, because Appalachians do not get good representation in the world and in the nation, in mainstream media. So that's something that I do. I also write about other kinds of people, but when I write about my people, I want to do it right, and I want to do it with complexity and nuance to counter, the stereotypes that are out there. But I also want to be honest about the challenges of our lives. And for the last, more than a decade, the opioid epidemic, which is just Lee County, Virginia, just the area where I live, and the two counties to the east of it really were ground zero of the opioid epidemic. And that was something most people know now, that was done to us quite deliberately. And the way it changed our community is pretty devastating. And most of all, what it has done to a generation of kids. We have a generation of kids coming up in Southern Appalachia who have been orphaned by opioid use disorder. They're being raised by people other than their parents because their parents are incarcerated or dead or non-functional. So I wanted to write about that because it's a story. It's a complex story. That I really felt needed to be told, and I felt like it kind of tied in with a long history of things that have been done to our region, and a long history of outsiders really not seeing us and our problems the way they really are, kind of blaming the victims instead of having compassion and being interested in solutions. So that was my challenge. I wanted to write about the orphans. And I spent years thinking, nobody wants to go there. It's dark material. It's difficult, and I care about my readers. I don't want to be mean to you, and I know that you have sadness, you have darkness in your life. I don't want to heap more of that on you, but I want to bring you into this story the right way to sort of. Basically, I wanted to find a way to tell this story that would invite you to follow me in, and go there and think about it and come out with maybe some new information and new compassion or new ideas. Anyway, whatever novels can do. Couldn't find it. Then, quite suddenly, in a surprising way, I had a conversation with Charles Dickens, and. If you want to know more about that, we can talk about it. But I did. And I realized this is his wheelhouse. Orphans, structural poverty. That's what he wrote about. And he had, this was dark material. You might know that Charles Dickens released his books in serial form, so like 32 pages at a time. They would be published like in a weekly magazine kind of thing, and he had people literally, crowds lined up at the docks waiting for the ship to come and deliver the next chapter of Charles Dickens' latest novel. That's that's what I call getting people into a story. So, we had this conversation, and I said, well, how did you do that? Because you're writing about what I wanted to write about, and I'm sure the people of your time didn't really want to read it either. And he said, you let the child tell the story. Nobody doubts the child. Point of view is everything. And I said, thank you. And David Copperfield was his favorite novel, Dickens's favorite of his novels, because it's his own story. Dickens had a terrible childhood with the poorhouse, child labor, what we would, a lot of what we would now call foster care, and he was mad about it. But he wrote with such vision. Well, mainly he constructed fantastic plots. He's so good at plot, and so I thought, what if I write my David Copperfield? What if I follow the plot? What if I sort of track the plot of David Copperfield, but translate it into Southern Appalachia and set it in my own place and time, and have my narrator is named Copperhead because he's got red hair, and that's what people call him, Copperhead, and eventually his first name is Damon, and he eventually comes to be known as Demon. So Demon Copperhead is the narrator, and he is my David Copperfield. And I just really took the Dickens masterclass, and I just plotted my novel with the same cadence and the same rhythm, and really actually tracked it very closely. And we can talk about that later too, how the challenges of sort of taking a model from a Victorian novel as a model, and basing a modern day epic on it. But anyway, my hope is that I could have you lined up at the docks. I hope that this will be the modern equivalent for you of getting lined up at the docks and opening this book and just wanting to read and read. That's what I hope I can give you. And the key to that, as I said, is plot and voice. And so I'm going to just read a little bit. I'm going to read a page and a half of the beginning to just give you the sound of Demon's voice. First, I will open my water bottle. And I will also say, I've been saying this a lot, you do not have to read David Copperfield to read this book. It's absolutely, you can if you want to, but this book, my book stands completely on its own. But if you do read them both, you will find, 1,000 private jokes, but not so private now, between myself and Charles Dickens, because it's just like chapter and verse. I got ideas from David Copperfield. And so you might remember, do you remember how David Copperfield begins? Chapter 1, I am born. Okay, so here we go. Demon Copperhead, chapter 1. First, I got myself born. A decent crowd was on hand to watch, and they've always given me that much. The worst of the job was up to me, my mother being, let's just say, out of it. On any other day, they'd have seen her outside on the deck of her trailer home, good neighbors taking notice, pestering the tit of trouble, as they will. All through the dog breath air of late summer and fall, cast an eye up the mountain, and there she'd be, little bleach blonde, smoking her Pall Malls, hanging on that railing like she's captain of her ship up there, and now might be the hour it's going down. This is an 18-year-old girl we're discussing, all on her own and as pregnant as it gets. The day she failed to show, it fell to Nance Peggott to go bang on the door, barge inside, and find her passed out on the bathroom floor with her junk all over the place and me already coming out. A slick fish-colored hostage picking up grit from the vinyl tile, worming and shoving around because I'm still inside that sack that babies float in pre-real life. Mr. Peggott was outside idling his truck, headed for evening service, probably thinking about how much of his life he'd spent waiting on women. His wife would have told him the Jesusing could hold on a minute. First, she needed to go see if the little pregnant gal had got herself liquored up again. Mrs. Peggott, being a lady that doesn't beat around the bushes, and if need be, will tell Christ Jesus to sit tight and keep his pretty hair on. She came back out yelling for him to call 911 because a poor child is in the bathroom trying to punch himself out of a bag. Like a little blue prize fighter. Those are the words she'd use later on, being not at all shy to discuss the worst day of my mom's life. And if that's how I came across to the first people that laid eyes on me, I'll take it. To me, that says I had a fighting chance. Long odds, yes, I know. If a mother is lying in her own piss and pill bottles while they're slapping the kid she's shunted out, telling him to look alive, likely the bastard is doomed. Kid born to the junkie is a junkie. He'll grow up to be everything you don't want to know. The rotten teeth and dead zone eyes, the nuisance of locking up your tools in the garage so they won't walk off, the rent by the week motel, squatting well back from the scenic highway. This kid, if he wanted a shot at the finer things, should have got himself delivered to some rich or smart or Christian non-using type of mother. Anybody will tell you the born of this world are marked from the get-out, win or lose. Me, though, I was a born sucker for the superhero rescue. Did that line of work still exist in our trailer home universe? Had they all quit Smallville and gone looking for the bigger action? Save or be saved? These are questions. You want to think it's not over till the last page. And it isn't. Now, we could go two ways from here. Actually, we could go many ways from here. If you like, I could read more. I could read another section of the book. But I always think, well, you've got the book. You can read. You don't really need me to do this for you. I would be happy to do so. But we could also just open the floor to questions now so that we could just have a conversation for the rest of our time. And I will also mention, I have no clock up here, so someone will just have to, will you give me a high sign when we're like 5 minutes out? Okay, that's great. So what do you say? More reading or just open the floor? Okay, show of hands. Open the floor. Reading. Okay. All right, this is, I don't want to give too much away, but things have happened. You know, that many things have happened. Nothing much. No, quite a lot. Because this is actually, you know, Charles Dickens told me how to do this. A whole lot of has happened, and Demon is about 11. He has been taken out of his home, put in foster care. And as it happens, I know a lot. I mean, I did a lot of research for this book, and I know a lot about foster care and DSS and, you know, services. And in our area especially, but I'm sure all over the country, these networks are terribly stressed. There are not enough DSS caseworkers. They are very poorly paid. The whole system of taking care of kids is so poor that kids just fall through. And yes, I'm sure, I know for a fact, there are many people who take in foster children who are wonderful, and who do it out of, the goodness of their hearts and with abundant love. There are also, sadly, people who do it to get the check, people who do it for the money, people who do it in farming country, people who do it for the free labor. And this is what has happened to poor Demon. Poor Demon. So he's gone to this farm where the farmer, who there are several other boys there. There are 3 other boys there, named Fast Forward, Tommy Waddles, and Swap Out. They're all, these boys are have been taken in by this farmer whose name is Creakle. They call him Creaky. It's Creaky Farm, and he's just getting a lot of work out of him, and it's kind of not a nice place to live. So here's Demon reporting on life at Creaky Farm. Time went by, and promises were kept. First, the hay. Creaky did the mowing on his tractor while we were at school. Then came baling, with his tractor pulling this ancient baler machine that kept breaking down every 50 feet. It would make a hellacious grinding noise, and every single time in his raspy voice, he'd call, "Goddamn piece of Tazewell shit." He must have bought it from somebody over there while the dinosaurs still roamed in Tazewell County. He'd have to stop and shut everything down, and then he and Fast Forward, but mostly Fast Forward, would climb up on the baler and reach in and yank stuff around, and then it would work again. The rest of us hauled and stacked the bales in the field to get ready for loading them on the truck. These were the square bales a person can carry, not the giant round bales most farms went over to at that time, where tractors and forklifts do the work. No, sir. Creaky had his slave boys, and we were a shit show. First of all, Tommy had his good points, but being strong, not one. He'd grab a bale with both hands on the twine, then stand there going red in the face like he's constipated until I could get over to help. And Swap Out, Christ. One hay bale weighed as much or more than Swap Out, and all this kid wants to do anyway is climb onto the piles we're stacking to where he ends up knocking things over and just general nonsense. We have to get all 200 and some bales onto the flatbed, a load at a time, then unloaded and stacked in the barn with more climbing, constipation faces, and nonsense. By then, Creaky is cursing the Foster's agency even worse than Tazewell County as far as trading in damaged goods. That was my first weekend. Sunday night, I never got to take a shower due to Fast Forward taking his time in there. There was another bathroom downstairs with an old nasty tub, but the sewage backed up there on a routine basis, so I was not the only one scared of that tub. Even Creaky used the upstairs. It took all I had left in me to haul ass up into my bunk and lie there on fire, my whole body itching from getting scrubbed by 200 Brillo pads of hay. I had 3 weeks to serve in this prison, and not one of them fully behind me yet. I wondered how Mom was doing in rehab. She always said drying out was the worst hell imaginable, and I felt sorry for that. Not now. Tell me about hell, I told her in my mind. All you had to do today is your moral goddamn inventory and a lot of lying around on nice, clean sheets. So I'm going to just open up the floor now, and I will tell you also, that really when you answer questions, I will just talk some more about stuff. So questions can be a starting point. But as you approach the microphone, I want to just suggest that you ask yourself a question. What is a question? Okay, it ends with a question mark.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. So you did have me waiting at the dock for this book. I pre-ordered the audiobook and started reading it as soon as it released on Tuesday morning. I just could not wait for this book. My question is this. You do such an amazing job of the voice of Demon. He makes original observations, he uses surprising language, and you sustain that throughout the book. What were the challenges of doing that, and how did you overcome those?
What were the challenges of finding and sustaining this voice, Demon's voice? The challenges were many. I knew, though, as I said before, it's hard. It's dark material, and I needed this pilot. Not a pilot. He's just like your friend, and you're in an inner tube going down like Niagara Falls. But he's like right there with you. He's narrating. So it had to be a really propulsive voice, a teenager who talks like a teenager. He's got attitude. I really just started hearing him. He started talking to me on the night that I realized I was going to do a modern day David Copperfield. I started hearing him, and he started talking, and I couldn't shut him up. So I just went with it. I have spent plenty of time around teenage boys and teenage girls, but I know how teenagers talk. But so the challenges were many. Some that I will mention is one is that he's Southern Appalachian, and I wanted his diction, his vernacular, to be absolutely pitch perfect Southern Appalachian. We speak our own language. And a challenge of that is that language is so mocked. It's so ridiculed. I should know. When I left Kentucky and went to college in Indiana, people I didn't know would come up to me in the dining hall and say, "What is this? What is this?" Trying to get me to say mayonnaise. Syrup, I said pitcher, like a pitcher on the wall. I mean, people just laughed and laughed at how I spoke, and I was so stunned by this. I didn't realize until I left Kentucky how direly the world looks down on us, and still does. It didn't help anything that the movie Deliverance came out the year I went to college. But you know what? James Dickey didn't start this. I mean, J.D. Vance, it was that book was. Anyway, this stereotype persists. Yeah, we'll just pass over that one. This stereotype persists, and if you're from the area and you're sensitized, much of it is unconscious bias. People don't know. People from the city, my city friends don't know that they're condescending when they ask me, "How can you live there so far from everything?" Define everything. So it's something we live with, but I really wanted to get this language on the page and in your ear. But I also knew that if he said, there's certain things, certain things I never do, like what I call Uncle Remus language, where words are misspelled to represent the dialogue. I mean, a dialect, where words are spelled wrong. To show you how they're being pronounced. I hate that because I think it's condescending. Our language is our language. It's not wrong. It's a language. But certain words absolutely are sort of trigger words, like holler, I reckon. Like people just want, when a character says I reckon, people just want to put a straw hat on him and a moonshine jug in his hand. It's just such a strong stereotype that I had to ease you in. So you heard the opening page and a half. There is no holler, there is no I reckon, there are none of those, sort of trigger, I consider them, like hillbilly trigger words. I mean, by the end, yes, he's, as well as dropping F-bombs, he's dropping I reckons and hollers and this and that. But I wanted you to sort of respect him for, insofar as you respect, this teenage boy who's talking about Jesusing and such. I wanted you to hear his language and ease into him before you really get the full-on Appalachian language. So that was one challenge. Another challenge was that he was so angry that in the early drafts, I mean, even well before I even got to a first draft, through to the end of a first draft, I realized that his anger would be off-putting. He is a much angrier boy than David Copperfield. David Copperfield is so sweet, he's kind of wide-eyed. He's like, oh, the Mr. Murdstone is courting Mother. I hope this will go well. It's not gonna go well. Demon is like, this guy's stoner. I'm supposed to like him. I do not. He's a modern kid. He's wise. He's more cynical. But I had to dial back his anger. I had to work a lot on moderating his, he would be diagnosed as oppositional defiance disorder. I had to make him likable enough that you would get in there and be mad with him rather than being, teenagers do this. They push you away. So I had to work a lot on making him someone that you wanted to take this whole ride with, because it's a long ride, and I hope that I succeeded. I love him, that's for sure, and really that's what it all amounts to. I want you to love him. All right, yes.
Hi, Barbara.
I know you.
You too. Jill. Fine.
Yeah. We wrote a piece together about probably 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to see you.
Good to see you. And I was able to get the book early when I was in New York, and I've already read a couple of chapters, and I love it. One of the things I love is the names of all your characters. I wonder where they come from. And my other question is, when you start a book, do you know how it's going to end, or do you wait to see where these characters are going to take you?
Well, so can everybody hear the question? Do you hear the question pretty well? Okay, so there are two questions. The names, where did all these names come from? And when I start a book, do I know how it's going to end? Well, the answer to both of those is David Copperfield. But generally speaking, when I'm not modeling a book on another book, which is always, I've never done that before, I do a whole lot of structural work before I begin, writing chapter 1, I Am Born. I do a huge amount of sort of story architecture. I write paragraphs and paragraphs about initially sort of, what is this story about? What do I want? What do I want it to mean? What do I want it to, to say in the world? Who will be the characters who do this? What will they do? So I've done a whole lot of work before I'm actually writing, scenes and chapters. And so, yes, I do always know when I start, sort of what the bridge is, what the narrative arc is going to be, and where it's going to land. I don't write a first draft necessarily beginning to end. I am so grateful for computers, because what I tend to do, and certainly what I did with this book, is I set up a file for each different chapter, a computer file for each different chapter, and that way when I have my best ideas usually in the shower, something about hot water on the head, or when I'm walking or something, I'll just think, this scene where, the boat turns over, whatever, I can see it, I know how to write it, so I can just jump right into that and write that scene. So my books tend to, start at the beginning and kind of try to build this forward motion, but I also often will get to, chapter 32, and I've already written a draft of it. So, and always, without exception, I have written the last scene of a first draft a long time before I've finished the draft. Because once I've visualized that scene and can write it, it gives me this confidence I'm going to stick the landing. So yes, I always do that. What's unusual about this book is that the plot was already written for me, and so I knew how it was going to end before I even, Charles Dickens ended it 150 years ago. So I knew I was going to follow that same trajectory, although I will tell you that Dickens put this sort of epilogue onto David Copperfield where, like, it's 5 years later and we're happily married and we have all these children. I didn't do that. That was sort of universally considered a disappointment to David Copperfield, and I didn't need to replicate that. But one thing that I gave you in this book with my first-person narrator is the promise that he is going to be alive at the end, right? That in this book, that is no small thing because of what he goes through. And so, but it's a survivor's tale. He's telling you, this is what I lived through. I came out the other side. Here I am. And so that's, like, maybe you're not even thinking about it when you're reading, but that is a promise. And I don't know, do you know the writer Lee Smith? She's a friend of mine, and I sent her the manuscript, and she said, I was so worried about him. I couldn't sleep. I was so worried about him. But then I said, Lee, he's telling the story. He's alive. So there you are. As far as the names, once again, the names are, Tommy Waddles, Fast Forward, Swap Out. His best friend, Demon's best friend, is named Maggot. I hope that doesn't make you not want to read the book. Again, the answer in this case is Charles Dickens, because Dickens is, he's one of the things people love about him is his great character names. I just took his character names, and just as with, Demon Copperhead, I took his names and Appalachianized them. So there's the dangerous friend Steerforth in David Copperfield becomes, in my novel, a sociopath, the dangerous friend, Fast Forward. So Steerforth becomes Fast Forward. He's a high school narcissistic football quarterback. Who else? I think it was, Mr. Creakle becomes Creaky. There's a very famous, very important character in David Copperfield called Uriah Heep. I thought about that one, and I have all these characters. They're doing the same. They're serving the same purpose to the plot, but they're very different situations. I had to think, what is the modern equivalent of a shoe black factory? I know, it's a gas and go with a meth lab in the back, stuff like that. Uriah Heep, I thought, well, Heap is a pile, and piles is a common name where I live. And so this guy he's the assistant to the coach, and he drives stuff around, so they call him U-Haul Piles. So again, you don't need to know anything about David Copperfield, but if you do, you'll get these jokes. But it was made easier by the fact that in where I live, one of the things about us is that everybody has a nickname. That might be, I don't know if it's especially Appalachian, I do think it's rural, but everybody, men especially, have nicknames, and they are generally not flattering. And they're like, people use them, even like politicians will be Stumpy, Fiddles or whatever. And they go in the obituary, it'll be like Emmett Stubby Smith, died Stubby, they're rarely flattering, but Shorty, funny. This guy that always, the guy that came when I was growing up, that came to fix our plumbing was always called Funny. I mean, that was his nickname, Funny, and he was not funny. But anyway, the fact that these colorful nicknames are a feature of our culture gave me license to use them, and that made it easier to give characters colorful names. So thanks, good questions. And see, I told you, when you ask a question, I'm just going to talk about any old thing. But anyway, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Bob Herndon. I've read a lot of your books. I really love your writing. My wife and I
Thank you.
read your sentences out loud to each other. You're the only author we've done that to.
Thank you.
What I like is you write what you know, and you know Appalachia. And I have grown up in liberal world from Massachusetts. I moved here, and I don't understand how MAGA works. How does it appeal, and is there anything that can be done to make liberal ideals more appealing to Appalachia? Does that make sense?
You're asking, you don't understand how MAGA works, the Trump phenomenon, I guess,
Yeah.
and you're wondering if there's anything that liberals can do to make liberal ideas appealing? Yes, there is. Yes, sir, there is. The answer is not to start every conversation with, "You idiot," because that's what people are hearing, and I'm not kidding you. That's what people hear. And nobody wants to hear that. We all take our, I mean, this is, we're straying from the subject of literature, but not really. We all decide what to believe, not based on evidence. None of us do that unless we are scientists. That is not how humans work. And I've researched this a lot because this was the subject of another novel that I wrote called Flight Behavior. I looked into, there are psychologists who study how behavior works and how we decide what's true, how we decide what to believe. Why is it that 30 people can look at the same set of facts and come away with at least 5 different ideas, if not 30 different ideas, of what happened there? Well, the reason is it's not how our brains work. We don't really take truths from evidence. We decide first what is true, then we look for evidence to support what we believe. That's how we all work, as I said, unless we are scientists, because they learn to find truth a different way. So, if it's not from the evidence, where is it? We take truths from sources we trust. Our parents, if we're children, our peers, if we are teenagers, our television station, our radio, but the one that we've chosen because we feel like those TV hosts, those radio programs are our people. We choose the information sources that we feel. I mean, it's not just media. We take truths from our pastor, from our the patriarch or matriarch of our family, the people who we perceive to be on our team, on our side, looking out for our best interests. And so we choose our radio stations and our TV stations and our newspapers the same way. These people are my people. They're looking out for me. It's how we all work. And so in the modern era, our sources of information have become more and more, as they say, ghettoized or siloed or whatever. There's less and less overlap. The only way to cross those boundaries is somehow come across to when you speak to someone who believes different truths from you, they're not going to listen to anything unless they feel respected, they feel they can trust you, they feel like you are on their team. So until we can have those conversations where both sides say, I want to listen to you, I respect you, I'm on your side, that's the only way it will happen. And something I wanted to accomplish with this book is to show readers who are not from Appalachia how tiresome it is to be looked down on all the time, to be dismissed all the time, to be invisible in mainstream American culture. When people are angry and when they are traumatized, our brain, those things change our brain and make us more likely to have kind of black and white thinking. It's hard, and that's also, a psychological truth, that when people are traumatized, it's harder to perceive nuance. It's harder to accept nuance. You're just like, you're on my side or you're not on my side. So if any of this is helpful, I'm glad.
I think we need to hear more of that, for sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to help you sell more books, so I'm going to go to another book.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Yeah, just speak a little more slowly. Somehow I'm not getting, it's probably going back to you more than it is to me.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes. Just
Okay. I'm not used to speaking in microphones. I want to help you sell more books. So I'm going to change to another book, your nonfiction, Animal, Vegetable, Miracle. Yay. You started 2 movements with that book. Authors doing something for a year and then writing about it. Right? And there's so many of them now, which are amazing.
There are, but there were not when we did that.
Right? You started it.
I suppose.
You started it. And then you also started, even more importantly, the locavore movement, which has affected hundreds of millions of lives, right? And
Yes.
billions of dollars.
So what is your question?
So question is, did you know when you were writing that book that would happen? Number one. And number two, are you still eating that way?
Okay, 2 good questions. I have never, no one would ever accuse me of being trendy. I started life in hand-me-down clothes, and I never think of myself as being on the front of any wave. And when we took that book, Animal, Vegetable, Miracle, when we took the proposal of that book to my publisher, I thought they would just say, okay, and the next novel? I just did not expect much of it. I mean, I love my publisher, but they know what's going to work. They said, we'd love to see this book, write this book. They, I guess, felt like, the gestalt was there, but I don't think any of us, and my family and I do not take credit for starting, the local food movement. There's a long tradition of it. But somehow or other, we caught the wave. I mean, we wrote that book right at the time when I guess enough people were fed up with the industrial food system and all the different kinds of damage it does to our bodies, to our families, our communities, and our land and our farmers, all the different kinds of damage. And it's been a wonderful thing for us to have put that book in the world and see as the world's changing, people continuing to read that book. And I can't tell you how many people have written us. I mean, really, thousands of people have written us with, to send pictures of how they dug up their whole, front yard and planted tomatoes, how their kids are eating vegetables. It's a very happy thing to be part of a movement that makes the world better and is also really fun and delicious. I mean, a lot of times being pious means, sort of giving something up or being, sort of choosing a less enjoyable life. But in this case, it is so good. So we've really enjoyed that. I don't know that we invented the word locavore when I had never heard it before when I put it in the book. Other people might have invented it at the same time, but the next year it was the word of the year, in the American Heritage Dictionary. So it was, we continue to be gratified by the fact that people still read read that book and still send us letters. Now and again, we get one that says, I was so inspired by your book. I gave up my job on Madison Avenue and I bought a farm. And I just think, oh, Lord. Don't blame me. But anyway, no, it is wonderful. And also our family, well, we did a 10-year anniversary edition with an update, because people do ask so often, are we, do we still live the way we lived in that book? The answer fundamentally is yes. We are, I mean, it's not a parlor game. We how can I say this? We're normal people. We don't deny ourselves, spices or chocolate or coffee. But we do pay a lot. We grow a lot of food. We live on a farm. We have animals. We have a huge garden. Our daughters are both adults now. They've gone into other kinds of work, but they're very conscious. Just, sort of mindful of where things come from. Not just food, clothing, everything. I think it's a time when we pay more attention to the things we consume and the processes that created them and what that costs to the world. So, but I was going to say in the 10th anniversary edition you can get, which has update chapters from all four of us, including Lily, who would ask me to tell you she is no longer the chicken girl. She likes chickens perfectly fine, but she's 26, and she, she's in grad school and stuff like that. Anyway, thank you for asking.
Thank you. Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, you've spoken about this a little bit before as pertains to the language, but I suspect you probably have more to say about it. You do such a great job of representing the South and the rural South in particular, and that's such a big part of so many of your books. And how do you feel about the sort of responsibility in that representation, and how do you approach it, I guess, if you could say more about that? Thank you.
Well, representation in literature is something that's hugely discussed now, and I think that it's, and I think in the main it's good, it's wonderful. When I was just starting, we were still arguing that since women mostly read about female experience in books written by men, wouldn't it be nice if women writers could also write about female experience? That's where we were, in the early days of my career, in the late 80s. And my first book was published in 80, is this right? Yeah, 88. So, at that time, there was literature, John Updike, and that's literature, and then there's women's literature was down, that was like, some of you girls might want to read this too, Alice Walker or, Virginia Woolf. So we've come a long way, and I think we're all much more thoughtful now, writers and readers, about who is writing this and what right do they have to represent, sort of this demographic. And mainly, the way I think about it, taken to an extreme, if we could only write about ourselves and our exact experience, there would be nothing on earth but autobiography, and that would be so boring. This is not what you want, trust me. I think the most interesting stories come from, everybody thinks a good story has to have conflict. And I love cultural difference in a story. I love to make stories about when worldviews, collide or knock up against each other. It's interesting to see what sparks can fly. So if you have to have people of different faiths or different, demographics or different belief systems in a story, of many different ones, who gets to write that? I can't be everything in my story. So I'm thoughtful. I try to make sure I don't usurp a story that would be better told by someone else. But Fundamentally, everybody has to make their own rule. My rule that I made for myself a really, really long time ago, and it works for me, is characters I know, whose experience I know, I know well, I can represent from the inside. Characters of another caste, another culture, another, deeply different experience, I will only represent from the outside. It's all point of view, from the dramatic point of view. So when I wrote a story set in the Congo, which is very much about cultural difference, called The Poisonwood Bible, I made a decision early on. There will be a lot of African characters, a lot of Congolese characters in this story, but I'm never writing to you from the inside. I know what those characters look like, how they dress, how they talk, the food they cook. I know all those things from having lived there, from having seen, but I can't tell you what it feels like to be Congolese. So I had to bring 4 little girls from Atlanta, Georgia, and their somewhat deficient parents into the Congo and tell you that story through the eyes of 4 little girls from Georgia, 4 little white girls from Georgia. I felt safe and confident representing the story from that point of view. So Appalachia, yes, Appalachia is my bailiwick. Can I really tell the story from the mind, inside the mind of a teenage boy? Yeah, I can. I mean, I'm just going to claim that one. I steered clear of certain parts of teenage male experience, but I've seen enough of it from the outside, I don't feel like any redheaded, Lee County teenager is going to be following me around saying, "She has no right to tell my story." I don't think that's going to happen. But thank you for bringing it up, because I think as writers, we all have to decide what we're comfortable with. And I will also tell you, because I can tell you now, the secret that I've been holding since April, well, you might know, this is an Oprah Book Club selection. And yeah, she called me in April. It was just like a minute after I'd finished the book. I couldn't imagine. I didn't think anybody had read it yet, so I wasn't really, I wasn't on that, wavelength, and this person calls, and I don't even know why I picked up. Who answers, the phone when you don't know who's calling? And because it's going to be somebody selling insurance, and they're saying, "Oh, your book is going to be in the," and I said, "Who is this really?" And she said, "It's Oprah." It was. So sorry about that. I probably felt just about the way. There's some ladies here who, when I got here and came up, they tried to send me to the back of the line. Back of the line. So yeah, and I said, "I'm Barbara." So I feel ya. That's what I did to Oprah. Anyway, why did I bring up Oprah? I remember this. I'm on point here. She said, interestingly, well, she loved this book because she was a foster kid. She had that child. She was a thrown-away kid. She was bounced around between relatives raised by people who did not necessarily want her. And I mean, she just got right into why she loved the book, and I was so moved by her, by her experience as a reader. But she said, I loved this book. This book is about things that people really need to read about. And then I thought, oh no, what if she's not from Appalachia? Well, people say Appalachia. She said, I had to Google you to make sure you were from there. So I'm glad she did that. I don't want people from elsewhere telling our stories. So it's a good question.
Hi. I'm curious about a couple of things. The first thing,
About what?
A couple of things.
Okay.
The first thing being what role your own family life, either growing up or having your own family, plays in the development of your stories and characters. I just know telling my own stories and hearing them from family oral history, that's just a big part of our storytelling. Secondly, I was curious more about your conversation with Charles Dickens, and if that helped you, decide to tell this from the teenage boy's perspective versus a teenage girl's, or vice versa. So, thank you.
All right, 2 questions. The first is, what role does my family life, or my natal family, or my family, my present family raising children? Well, I think I don't write about my own experience per se. As I said, that would just I feel like my job is to invent lives that are much more interesting than mine. And really, it's because I construct stories I begin with theme. I figure out what I want to explore, what's the question I want to ask, and then I figure out a plot that will ask that question, kind of bring this theme to you as a reader. And then I sort of I cast it. I invent characters who will carry out my plot. So for me, character invention is kind of the last part, and I bring them on board to serve my plot. I could never use my friends and family in that way. First of all, because I want them to stay my friends and family, but second of all, because they're not that cooperative. I need these characters to do exactly what I need them to do. So they have to have the particular psychology and history and likes and dislikes and fears that will make them navigate my plot in the way I want them to. And so I feel like I'm kind of like an anti-psychologist, because I figure out, I look at behavior, and then I back up and give these characters the appropriate damage so that they will, they will have the worries or whatever. So I'm very interested in psychology. I love inventing characters and honing characters so that they feel real to you, but they're not real people. They're not my family. I will say, as far as being a mother and raising children, I have always believed, as a mother and a writer, that being a mother makes me a better writer. I feel like motherhood has sort of it opened my eyes to many, many things about, women's experience and what everybody's doing with their time in the world. I can remember as a young person, seeing the grocery cart out in the parking lot, thinking, who would do that? And then I learned, the person who has a toddler here and a bag of groceries here and somebody's screaming in the car, you just go. Just sort of understanding. It's another understanding of life. Not that grocery carts are the main thing, but it's, you know what I'm saying. It's an example. So I feel like motherhood has given me so much understanding of psychology, of the world, of time, of children. There's a reason there are not a lot of child characters in literature, if you think about it. They're often set dressing, but children as actual characters in novels are rare. You want to know why? The guys writing those novels were not around kids. And that's really true. Or the women writing those novels, because, if you back up a century, very few women with children were able to, the writers were women who elected to have careers rather than families, because that's the choice they had, like George Eliot, Virginia Woolf. So I feel lucky that I have had this experience I could bring into my writing. And I also feel like having my own work allowed me, or Well, it allowed my daughters to grow up seeing, a woman who works, who identifies strongly with something she wants to do in the world to make the world better, and to support the family and all of that. But it also allowed me not to need to live through them. I have a perfectly good life, and they can have their own lives. One of them, I think, really should be a writer. She's a really, really great writer. Well, they're both articulate, but one of them, I wish she would be a writer, but, it's not because I want her to live through me. It's because she's a really good writer. But they can do whatever they want, and they are, and they're wonderful. Okay, one more question, looks like.
Yes. Got it. Hi, thank you so much. I have a question, again, about rural Appalachia. So I'm from rural Wisconsin, and I'm curious about how you go about sharing what life in rural Appalachia is really like, while being mindful of what I like to call the zoo effect.
What effect?
The zoo effect, Z-O-O, zoo, like animal zoo, which is where people from often urban areas end up sitting around going, oh my God, is this what people really live like? If you know what I mean?
Well, I kind of do that with novels set in Manhattan.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of why we read, to live other lives and view, and I mean, I don't read a lot of novels set in Manhattan, but when I do, I just think, well, you could pay that much for shoes? You know what I'm saying? We read to live other lives. So I think what I said earlier still stands. When I represent Appalachia, I just want to make sure that it's a nuanced picture. And the main thing is, for it not to be, like hillbilly porn, whatever, because that's the other. We are represented either as a stereotype, as the dummy, or a poverty documentary. And so this book has, you met in the first page the 18-year-old who's as pregnant as it gets. We have the teenage, the sad teenage addicted mother, and then we're going to have her abusive boyfriend. We also have Nance Peggott next door, who is the mama that we all want. She's the woman who takes care of everybody in the neighborhood. Her husband, Mr. Pegg, is a philosopher. He knows the names of all the plants and all the birds, and if you really listen closely, he knows the meaning of life. We have Aunt June, who's this amazing nurse practitioner who just will not give up on her patients. And so I wanted to, I write ecosystems of characters. And it's especially important in a book like this that I give you the ecosystem of characters. So there are the people who are not functioning well, and there are the people who are taking care of them, and to show our resourcefulness, to show just I think one of the most interesting things about my home culture is how we do work in ecosystems, how community-oriented we are. We grow up hearing all the time how much we depend on other people. And, and we say please and thank you and yes, ma'am, and we see we see how people interact. And so, for me, that's what will save it from being a zoo.
This is kind of crazy. Will you tell the story of your husband and the turkey from Animal, Vegetable, Miracle?
My husband and the turkey?
It may be only a couple of sentences in the book, but it is this huge picture and story in my head.
Well, I guess I would refer you to the book. It's all there. But
I know,
yeah.
I could go back and read it, but I'd love to hear you talk about where the turkey is dancing around your husband.
Well, yeah, a turkey fell in love with my husband. Long story short. I don't know if we really want to go there, but just in brief, modern turkeys are the capacity to breed has been bred out of them. All the turkeys that you know, the butterball turkeys you buy in the grocery store, the industrial food system produces turkeys via artificial insemination. Is that a job you want? But anyway, because of that, turkeys, if left to their own devices, don't know how to do it. So in our book, we raised these heritage turkeys and sort of had to introduce them to, you know, to sex. But since we raised them, the females imprinted on my husband and just followed him around. Anyway, so flirtatiously. So someone asked, the previous questioner asked me to tell the Charles Dickens story. How did I have this conversation with Charles Dickens? And let me ask, how are we doing on time? How much time do we have? How many? 5. We have 5 minutes. Oh, is yours a quick question? A last? Your what? No more questions. Okay. I will tell the Charles Dickens story, and then I will, and then we will say our farewells. I've told this story a number of times, including on national TV and in the New York Times. So how many people have heard this story already? Actually, surprisingly few. Clearly, you don't watch TV or read the New York Times. No, it's a big paper. You could have missed it. Well, as I said, I was really distressed. I had been cooking this idea for 2 years. It was like a house I could not get into. I didn't know how I was going to tell the story of the orphan children. And I was at the end of my book tour for Unsheltered, and after my U.S. book tour, I often have to then go to UK and do a UK book tour, and then I'm really tired and really a little bit altered from just, you know, exhaustion. And I was also just really starting to obsess, because when you get to the end of a book tour, you really want to know what your next book is going to be. You want the key, you want already to have the key to unlock that next novel. That's just how it is. It's like, otherwise it's like you've jumped out of the plane and you don't have a parachute. So, just on a whim, I had a weekend free at the end of my UK book tour, and my husband was flying over for the weekend. Just on a whim, I booked this place I found online called Bleak House, because it is really Bleak House. It is where Charles Dickens lived, and where he on his seaside home in Broadstairs. And it's where he wrote David Copperfield. And I just thought, well, that's a good place to go. Because it was an inn, you know, it was functioning as like a bed and breakfast. You could book yourself in there. And I thought, well, it'll just be, you know, a bed and breakfast. It probably won't be all that Dickensy. Well, when we got there, it was November, so sleet was in our faces, and we're walking down this cobbled lane, and here's this creaky old mansion on the cliff overlooking the sea, and we knock on the door, and this little, literally tiny limping woman answers the door, and it's like little Dorrit, and she said, "May I take your bag?" So I said, I can do it, I can get it. And then the guy behind then it was like Fagin was at the desk, this saying, "Let me take your money," and this was not a reenactment. I mean, it's just like, it was so atmospheric, very, you know, it was just like Dickens left and not a lot has happened since. So, and November, it turns out, is not high season in the seaside town of Broadstairs. So we were the only people in this mansion, and they just said, well, you know, make yourselves at home, use any room you want. And so Stephen went to bed in, you know, Charles Dickens's bedroom. But I was attracted to this room at the end of the hall that was Dickens's study. And it was a little room with these bay windows that looked out onto the ocean, and here's the desk. And it said, this is the desk where he wrote David Copperfield. And so I just went and I sat at that desk, and there's like Charles Dickens's stuff lying around. I mean, not, underwear, but but like manuscripts and, Dickens' Abelia and, things hanging on the walls. And I just started getting this vibe, like the man was here. And that's when, I received this understanding that this is what he lived, that exactly what I was thinking about, structural poverty and what it does to kids and how they just get thrown away by society. That is what he wrote about. And I just felt him saying, you have to do this. It was just so eerie. And he said, but here's the thing. You let the child tell the story. And I said, okay. And I ran down the hall back to, and I woke up Stephen and I said, I just had this talk with Charles Dickens. And he said, I can't wait to hear about it in the morning. but I hope it went well. And so, I just pawed through the suitcase and I got out my notebook that I'd been carrying around, and it was still blank. And I got my notebook and I got my pen and I went back to that desk and I sat there and I started plotting out Demon Copperhead on that desk that night. Well, you're just wonderful. So I'm going to tell you two more small stories. Not stories, they're just two true things. One is, I am really sorry that I can't sign your books. This is the first book tour I've ever done where I'm not signing books, and I'm not signing here, there, or anywhere, in a fox, with a box, whatever. I cannot, and I feel like because I'm a good girl and I do things for people. I hate to disappoint people, but I'm going to tell you why I can't. I have Dupuytren's contracture. Who knows what that is? Yeah, I see some hands up there. Yeah, it's you don't die of it. I'm happy to say, but it's a progressive disorder of the fascia which causes your fingers to close up to your palm and into an unusable hand. And I have the worst case of it that my doctor's ever seen. And so I've had 6 surgeries to open back up this hand so that I can use it, so that I can type. But the last 2 were after my last 2 book tours, and during which I signed, I'm not even kidding you, more than 40,000 books. And so my surgeon, these two last surgeries, each one's harder, and he said, I don't think the next one will be very successful. And what are you doing to accelerate this so fast? Is there anything that you grip? Do you do any kind of gripping for hours at a time? And I said, okay, no more. So that is why, and I'm sorry, but if you will let me keep my hands, I will write you more books. The other thing is that one other thing, and I'm okay, 2 more things. All right, I'm at a pulpit, I'm gonna preach. You have a vote coming up. And I don't need to tell you this, in this state, it matters so much that you vote. You have a couple of races that should be no-brainers, because there's a no-brain issue. And while I previously said we don't start any conversation with you idiot, we can start with one with you hypocrite. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. So So, no, I mean, when we talk to our neighbors who vote differently from us, we want to be kind. We have to be kind. But I'm going to ask you, I don't have to ask you to vote. I know you're going to vote. I'm going to ask you to think of somebody in your life who might not, and see if you can help them get to the polls. Coming in here, I saw all these signs where you can vote early. There are a lot of people, and you know this very well in this state, there are ways that people are profoundly discouraged from voting. And so anything you can do to help people have their voice count, I thank you for it, because it matters so much. Okay, the other thing is I thank you for being readers, being book consumers. However you consume books, it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I appreciate you buying books. I appreciate you buying my books and other books, but if you can't, I'm just glad that you read, and I thank you for it, because I believe reading literature is a project of creating empathy in ourselves. And I believe that empathy and compassion for the stranger is what will save us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you all so very much for coming. As you saw on the crawl this evening, we've got some great events coming up. Silas House, Ross Gay. We'll be back here in the church for Carmen Didi for a Milk and Cookies story time for her new book. And December 2nd, the first African-American principal dancer of the American Ballet Theater, Misty Copeland, right back, yes, back here in the church. Have a wonderful evening. We will see you all again very soon.